All right, based off number of requests, today we're going to talk about how to take a wheel like this and turn it in to a wheel like this. Guys who are familiar with my build have seen me sporting this design before. Actually, all my wheels are wrapped this way already, so I'm removing the wrap in order to do this video because I have to change the color slightly anyways to match the new color with my sort of color scheme. Anyways, but so that's what we're going to start talking about. Okay, so wrapping the wheels. So as most of you who've watched my videos know, I usually wrap outside, but it's damn cold outside right now because I'm in the Northeast, New York specifically, so that ain't going to happen. But these wheels got to get wrapped before I put them on, so that's what we're going to do. Wrapping the wheels isn't hard if you know how to wrap, or if you've wrapped anything before, at least the way I do it. Now, if you're going to wrap an entire wheel, these instructions are only partially going to work. It is hard to do. I would highly recommend that if you want to wrap your entire wheel and you're not very good at wrapping, go find a pro, because it's much harder than you think to get a very good wrap on an entire wheel. Matter of fact, in many cases, wrap guys will use heavier than normal wrap. But for the accents that I do, that's not so hard. So the real trick for the accents that I do, it's about prep more than anything else. So first thing, really important, is to clean the rim surface where you're going to be wrapping with alcohol, rubbing alcohol. That just sort of takes off any of the grease and grime that could really affect your ability for that wrap to adhere. So I'm going to do that real quick, just wiping them down. I'll dry it a little bit more as I go. So once you've got the space clear, I've already cleaned these once, so they're not quite as dirty as they would be normally. I just need to get the dust on since the last time I cleaned them. So once you've got that done, then the next thing comes down to a couple of other prep items. Namely, getting your wrap right and having primer. So, what is primer? So if you're not familiar with wrapping, you probably don't know, but there's a thing called, they call it tape primer, vinyl primer, tape primer 94 from 3M. This is what I use. It is expensive. You can get it on, well, it's expensive for what it is. You can get it on Amazon. I also, in some of my other videos you may have seen that sometimes I get it and use it in these little tubes too, which are handy if you're just doing a little bit here and there. But for this case, I'm going to use the full primer. Now, primer just helps everything adhere as well as possible. So it's important to have. But it just sort of helps you make sure that this thing sticks because you're going to do some edges and all that fun stuff. So the next hint is that if you're doing accents like mine, you don't want to start with these big pieces of vinyl and you don't want to cut them by hand if you can at all possibly do it. So there's a couple of options. You'll see I have a couple of different sizes cut up here. I have them cut up by a friend of mine on a regular basis who owns a sign shop. Thanks, J2 Customs. So they do this stuff for me on a big plotter cutter, and getting these the right sizes with straight edges allow you to do a much better job. So I have one size that will help me do that. Then I have a bunch of other sizes, namely either 1 inch or in most cases ½ inch, where I can do these edges. Now having these cuts lets you get a nice straight edge when you're going around here. So if the edges are going to show in your vinyl wrap, unless you've got a really steady hand, then I would try to pre-cut it like a pinstripe if you can. Now one other option is to I use this a lot, just like a regular paper cutter and stuff for smaller cuts. But if you're not, then usually a sign shop can help them cut maybe you can order them cut, different types, different colors of vinyl you can get cut, which is helpful too. So I'm going to be using these pre-cut ones that I got from my friends at J2 Customs. All right, so past that, the other stuff I need is pretty simple. You need a good squeegee, or whatever you want to call it, hard edge. You need a good razor blade. Don't skimp on those. Don't reuse them. Get a nice sharp one so you have nice, sharp, clean edges. And you're going to need a heat gun. I have two types of heat guns. This battery-operated one I use for smaller things, and a big one that I use for bigger, more complicated items where you have to stretch the vinyl a lot. But this is pretty straightforward, so I don't need that. So getting started is actually pretty simple. In this particular situation, I'm going to start with this inside corner wrap. Just because it gives me a good basis to start. So what I'm going to do is prime it a little bit. This stuff is pretty powerful, so use it sparingly. Shake it first. But just give a little bit of primer to the areas. You don't really need too much, as I said before. I've never had a problem. I have heard that this can be a problem with certain types of paints and other colorings, so I've never seen it personally, but you know, use at your own caution. These are powder coated rims, so they're less likely to be affected by something like that. Make sure to cover it up whenever you're not using it. Not only is it important to not let it spoil, but also it smells like hell. So now I'm going to peel the wrap. I'm going to start with straight corner and work my way out to the more cut parts. So I just visually line that part up. Now, when it comes to worrying about bubbles and keeping things, the wrap looking right, the trick is to make sure you adhere as you go, nice and slow, and working your way out, or working your way in one direction, I guess is a better way to point it. It doesn't have to be out. I guess you could go the opposite way. But this keeps you from having to cut. You get a nice straight cut down here at the bottom this way, because up here you're going to cut anyways. So I'm going to grab a pair of scissors. Well, actually I probably should have added that to the list of things you need. I apologize. Scissors are an important item. So I'm going to cut this. Here, since I don't need this. I also advise to have a nice trash can nearby. You're going to make a bit of a mess a lot of times with this. So you want to make sure you force this down in a nice solid seal. Now here I cut a little bit too much, so what I'm going to do, it's easy to fix, heat that vinyl up. And stretch it. It's very stretchy. It'll go right back into its own shape. So you stretch it, it sticks to that primer really well. Prime surface, and then you can get it all in place. So, now in this case you probably don't need to because you can sort of see your edges, but if you're cutting edges, and maybe yours are not as defined as these are, it's a good thing to heat them up a little bit, and they'll become more noticeable. And then you can simply start cutting. I like to lean the razor blade against a nice surface. Careful not to put too much pressure on, because you can cut the actual finish. The ends, sometimes you have to sacrifice and just let it break and then go back and revisit the end in order to get a nice clean cut. Again, sharp razor blade, very important. You can see why, start to see why you need a trash bin close by, because there is a lot of extra. So I'm going to trim up here as I mentioned. Good. Then I'm going to do this side. This is one of the reasons why I like to wrap them outside. My lighting in my garage is nowhere near as good, so you can see so much better when you're in daylight. Now, you have to be a nice clean line. So keep your eyes peeled for places where that vinyl did not cooperate with you, and just trim those off very carefully. Doesn't take a lot of pressure to cut the vinyl, so as long as you're real careful, you shouldn't cut the finish of your rim. So one question I get, so these are RFX 11s, I believe they're called, from Rohana. Stock, I believe these come, or at least they can come, with diamond etched edges. Mine did. I had them powder coated over just because I wanted them to be. So I get a lot of questions of, will it work with the powder, with the diamond cut? I don't know for sure. I asked somebody much smarter than I, or much more experienced than I about this, and they said probably not. So if you have diamond cut edges, they probably will not wrap easily. Now, doesn't mean you can't wrap around them by sealing to other parts of the wheel, but sealing to the actual diamond cut edge, probably not. Alright, now, from there, I've got it applied. Look for bubbles. I happen to be pretty lucky laying this down. I don't think I got any bubbles. As you saw, I sort of cleaned it up by just following the contour of the wheel, which sort of matches with how I wrap these things. If your wheels are nicked and everything, that's a little bit harder to do. So you just have to take your time and do the best you can. The truth is that unlike the wrap when you're wrapping a full car and things are a little bit more noticeable with the changes in lines and, you know, the big space, little tiny imperfections in some of the lines here aren't going to be very noticeable on your wheels, unless you take a lot of pictures of them like I do, in which case that's a reason why I'm sort of a little anal about them. Anyway, so that's that one fork. Now, from there, the rest of the lip is really similar process. In this case, I'm going to measure out cuts of this vinyl. Measure them a little bit longer than that thing, that space that I'm wrapping. And the same thing with the insides. And then just work on the edges. So I'll do this one, talk you through it, and then we'll fast forward the other ones because they're just a repeat of the same process. So same thing, just a little bit of primer on the edges where you're going to be putting it down. Don't put it where you're not going to be putting it down, as we talked about before. This is pretty strong, sticky, nasty stuff, and heaven forbid you've got a finish that might be sensitive to this. You don't want that. Don't prime too far ahead of when you're applying the vinyl. It has to be pretty quick. The cure time, I don't know the exact cure time, but these cure pretty quick. Alright, so then I'll do this middle piece. It's a small enough piece that you don't have to unwrap it a little bit at a time. Get it close to on that edge as possible. Now remember, the vinyl can be manipulated. So how do you get the curve? Simple. Just force it. Right? You're going to get this lip out here as you force it around because you're curving it, which is fine. Now that's one of the reasons why you need the primer. The primer is going to help enforce that curve and keep it there steady. Right? Then when you've got it laid down, slice off any extra. Don't slice this off. This extra is actually one of the things that's going to keep it on the rim. You've got to tuck it under here, or otherwise it will come up. I can tell you with lots of confidence, first times I tried to do this, I literally tried to get it exactly out. I cut it down the exactly right size, tried to follow it, and it came up every time. The reason why is because you need that extra space. So in these, what you do is you curve them around the outside of the rim. Then this is what you use your little squeegee for. Tuck it in good. Get it down there nice and solid. Trim any little extra off that you don't want before it sets with any primer. Work bubbles out with your fingers and move on. So as I said before, I mean, I've already primed this, but I'm just going to reprime, or it's a little tacky, just checking it. So then this process is the exact same. Start in one corner, work your way over. So get your anchor in, corner where exactly where you want it, press it, and start curving it around. Use those fingers to keep it down. Get the line as curved and straight as possible. on stretching it until you get the line you want. Chop off any additional with the razor. Then apply some heat. That'll help set the primer too. Use your fingers to try and work any bubbles out, especially as you heat it. Most, especially Vivid products, are heat release for air bubbles, so as you hit it with the heat, it will help release any air bubbles out of there. Makes it easier to work them out. And it also makes it easier to get those edges folded over. And again, use the squeegee to get it in there. Now, if you happen to have more material than I do, I get the material cut pretty close, so I don't really have a lot of overlap. You can sort of tuck it in towards the tire with this process to hide it. Also will help secure it anyways. But if not, just getting it nice and folded over. So that's the basic process, right? I'm going to repeat that for the entire edge of the wheel. I'm only going to do that one spoke. Why? I don't know, I like it that way. And I'm going to repeat that for the rest of the wheel, so I'll fast forward it as I do the rest of it. Before I go through that, there's a couple other things. Keep your hands clean when you start. The dirtier the hands, the more you can interrupt with how it's going to stick. And also you can possibly get your vinyl a little dirty at the same time. Again, you know, how perfect you need the lines really depends on how perfect you're going to care, how much you're going to care. You know, a lot of times you're not going to see them too perfectly. Other people want it just the way it is and are OCD like me, so you may spend a long time getting the lines perfectly straight. And other than that, again, if you're going to wrap the whole wheel, this is not the right process to use. You know, at a sort of high level, most people who wrap wheels and do it well and do it professionally are going to actually put the material on the outside of the wheel, superheat it, and push it through to get that sort of one-piece effect. And you have to really know what you're doing, and they usually use pretty heavy wrap. This is just the standard vinyl wrap from Vivid, and it actually is the same wrap that matches the rest of the accents with my car. Primer, a lot of people ask me if you really need primer. The answer is no, you do not need primer for everything. Primer really helps in situations like this, or in situations with heat. For instance, my headlights. There's a lot of primer involved in doing when I wrapped my headlights. So stuff like that, because the heat is so intense, it will come up, it will unravel if you don't have good primer in there. So primer is very helpful for really heavy edges, anything with heat. Something as simple as when they wrapped my carbon fiber hood, which I had professionally wrapped by Mo Mods, they actually use primer on the edges because, again, if you don't, the heat, it will just all come up. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap the rest of it, and I'll fast forward to that process and then talk again when we're done. And there is the final product. Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, send them in the comments. I'll get to them as soon as I can. Have a good one.